Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Cushman & Wakefield, Dimes Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Eastern Consolidated, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Giantomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Newmark Knight Frank, RAL Development Services, The Spandrel Group, LLC, Siami Development, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Urban American, The Wickoff Group.
There are people who have changed New York City. There are people who have been instrumental in the growth of development of companies remaining in New York City. And there are people who have made New York City their life. So today I have the young lady who was born upstate, Alair Townsend, who is the past publisher of Crain's New York, who is still a columnist with Crain's New York, who is the head, the volunteer head of the Boy Scouts of New York, and I'm so happy to have you today.
Thank you, Michael. Nice to be here.
As I was just saying, you were born in Elmira.
Yes.
Okay, and
Actually, pardon me, I was born in Rochester.
Oh, you were born in Rochester, but you moved to Elmira. I
Yes.
apologize. So you moved to Elmira, and you said to me that your mother was an educated person. She had a degree in master's in music?
In music, yes.
And your father?
Was a mechanical engineer and president of a company that made automobile parts.
And you had, what, 5 brothers and sisters?
2 brothers, 2 sisters, 5 in all.
5 in all. And now the interesting thing you said, was your grandmother said about college?
My grandfather. My grandfather was a bank president. That's my mother's father. And during the Depression, he sat the family down. And he wanted them all to know his wishes in case something should happen to him, and choices had to be made about who would go to college, 2 girls, 2 boys. And he said there should be absolutely no doubt about the fact that it must be the girls who went to college. The boys could always earn a living by the sweat of their brows. His daughters should never have to be dependent on any man.
So his daughter did go to college.
She did, as did all of them.
As did all of them. Now, when you lived in Elmira, you told me you went to this 2-room schoolhouse?
Yes. We lived just outside the city limits. There was a 2-room country schoolhouse that was built in 1865. And I guess you could look upon it as rather avant-garde because it was really an ungraded set of 2 classrooms. The first, for a while when my older brother went there were 4 grades in every room. Imagine trying to teach those. Then 3 grades in every room when I went there, then 2 grades per room, and then it was torn down.
So you graduate high school and you decide to go to Elmira College.
I did.
And why did you decide to go to Elmira College?
Well, I wanted to spend my junior year abroad, and they had a junior year abroad program that was really very nice. So I went there. I stayed in the dorms the first 2 years. I did want to be away. And I did spend my junior year
At London School?
At the London School of Economics. What a year.
And then you came back.
Then I came
and
back.
you graduate with a degree in sociology.
I did.
And you say, what am I going to do with a degree in sociology? So you go out to Madison, Wisconsin.
I got a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, and I did 2 more years of schooling, formal schooling. Got a master's degree in sociology from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And
But you said they were roots. Your father had gone to Ohio State.
right. My parents were both Midwesterners, and I think they pushed me subtly to think about graduate school in the Midwest so I could see what it was like.
So now you graduate, and as opposed to going back to Elmira, really, you go to Washington. How do you end up in Washington, D.C.?
Well, first of all, it never occurred to me to go back to Elmira. I didn't know what I wanted to do.
No, you could have come to the Big Apple.
Well, I could have. Actually, I looked in a sociological journal and found this job at the then Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in Washington. My father had just died, and there were 3 kids at home still with my mom. So I wanted to be close to home. I suppose Washington and New York are about equidistant, but Washington offered me a job, and away I went.
And as you said, it was like the lowest job on the ring at that.
Oh, yes.
And what was your job? What were you?
Well, we're talking, first of all, the Department of Health, Education, Welfare. I was in the Welfare Division. Within the Welfare Division, I was in the Research Division. Within the Research Division, the Children's Bureau. And within the Children's Bureau, the Division of Juvenile Delinquency Studies.
Was it there where you saw that it paid not to work for Medicaid or the next job?
No, that was not that job.
Okay, we'll get to that over
Right.
there. So you spent how many years at HEW at that time?
Oh, that was a very short stint. I learned what I needed to know and looked for something that would be a little more challenging.
And then your husband, at that time, takes an interview or comes up to work for the Lindsay administration?
Yes, he did.
He comes to the Lindsay administration, you come to New York, and you continue your studies at that time at Columbia.
Right. I did.
There was this very famous House of Representatives individual by the name of?
Representative Martha W. Griffiths.
One of your mentors of life.
From Michigan, absolutely. At that time, there were very, very few women in the House of Representatives, especially not the Senate. And many of them were there because they were the widows of a member of Congress who had died. She got there in her own right, and it was fascinating to watch a woman
She was
wield
involved with the
power.
Equal Rights.
She was the mother of the Equal Rights Amendment, and she got it through the House of Representatives twice. No mean feat.
So what happens? What do you do for her?
She was on the Ways and Means Committee, and she was a member of the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. And she chaired the subcommittee on fiscal policy. And she got from the Congress a special appropriation to do a study of cash and in-kind, meaning medical, housing, daycare, food, programs for low-income people, and how they all fit together or didn't in terms of the benefit packages.
And that's where you said to me, it paid, prior to that, it really paid not to work if you were under Medicaid because it was disincentive to do that.
Well, it was, and still is in some respects, but then especially so, the case that these benefits were all conditioned on how much money you had or did not have. So if you went to work, after you paid your work expenses, your taxes, Social Security in particular, each of these programs reduced their benefits because you now had some income. And the cumulative effect was sometimes that if you made $1, you lost, after taxes and benefit reductions, more than $1, which didn't make a lot of sense.
Now, so you're with her for how many years?
3.5.
And then what happens?
She retires from Congress. At that time, there were 3 new institutions just being formed. Budget committees in both the House and the Senate, and something called the Congressional Budget Office. They had been formed after a major fight between the President, Nixon, and the Congress about who had the power of the purse. And so these new committees and the Budget Office were established to try to ensure that the Congress added up in advance of its actions everything it intended to do and had to set limits on its spending. It worked for a while. I think it's honored more in the breach than in actuality today.
And you're in that role for what, about 3 years?
About, let's see, I think it was about 3 years.
And then what happens with Calfano?
Joe Califano was at that time the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. He hired me at the department to be something called the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Budget. What that meant was I had day-to-day responsibility for what, at that time, was the 3rd largest budget in the world. U.S. federal budget, Russian budget, and then the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare.
And so you had the responsibility, but what was your job?
My job was really to manage the department's budget, to put together the next budget for the succeeding year, to present it to Congress, to defend it in Congress, along with the Secretary, of course, and to work with each of the department's agencies to live within our means and to set priorities.
So now you have this nice office, everything is good, and what happens?
Well, before I left the department, Patricia Roberts Harris, came over to be secretary of the department, and she promoted me to assistant secretary for management and budget. And I was in my late 30s at that point, and this was really amazing because it was the highest that you could go without really being a political appointee. So I thought maybe on my tombstone they'd write, "She peaked too soon." So
But you had said to me that the assemblyman said to you, you had a job that you could have been there for life, in the original job, you know.
With Martha Griffiths?
Right.
No, somebody said that if I took that job, I would never have to look for another job.
Another job, yes.
People would find me. So I was sworn in as Assistant Secretary for Management and Budget the day before the election between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. We know how that turned out. And I was pretty sure I knew how it would turn out the day I was sworn in.
So you knew that your stint, as we would say, was not going to be that long.
Not long.
So what happens? I mean, you really had only spent, in your adult life and in your childhood, very little time in New York City.
Right.
I mean, it was just the period of time at Columbia studying
One academic year.
One academic year. What happens?
Well, Mayor Ed Koch was looking for a new budget director. The person who had done the job very ably was moving on, going back to run a family business in St. Louis. Ed had not liked the candidates he'd seen, so he formed a search committee of 3 business people, one of whom knew me from Washington. So they reached out to me.
And you took the train up, right?
I took a plane up.
Oh, you took the plane. Oh.
Spent the day in interviews, thought at the end of the day, some of the questions, had I ever floated a bond? No. And it was clear I wasn't a businessman. I thought, well, it was a nice thought. And much to my surprise, the next day the mayor's office called and wanted me to come up for another interview. And short and long, I got the job.
Now, but it was interesting, you said, because when you came back for the second interview, you really wanted to know how many people were left, and it was down to 2 of you.
2.
And as opposed to going back to Washington that night, you decided to stay over with a friend. And
This was the day of the press conference when I was announced. Oh, it was so exciting.
New York Times, New York Post, TVs, everything.
Daily news. My picture was in all of these papers. It was all over television. It was the first woman budget director, and the budget was a very salient issue in New York City. We'd almost gone bankrupt in 1975. The mayor had balanced the budget 1 year ahead of schedule. That was the fiscal year 1981 budget. So the budget was just big news. And the person who was going to run the budget turned out to be big news too.
So what do you do for a couple of years as the budget director?
Work night and day. The word yes was not in my vocabulary. It's interesting. I think the mayor was probably never so popular as during that time when he said no all the time. And he would explain to people, we cannot spend money we do not have.
So we blamed you.
You can blame me. But people were pretty good about it. When the city was really in tough shape.
True crisis.
People understood it. It was interesting to me that as soon as there were a few more dollars where some restorations and services could be made, then the scrapping began. It was like dogs fighting for a bone. If you can do some things, why not my thing? And why not everything?
So you're in that role for what, about 3 years?
3.5 years.
3.5 years, and then what happens?
And then Ed asked me over to his office one day and said, I'd like you to be deputy mayor for finance and economic development.
So how do you take that news? I mean, you were a budget person. Now, economic development was a different world of yours.
It's a different world. It's tax policy.
Great challenge.
Very big challenge, especially at that time. But I thought, wow, this is another wonderful challenge.
Now, this was really a challenge because this was when New York City was being, as one would say, being poached by Jersey City. Hoboken was coming over there. Secaucus with the Hartz Mountain was over there. But besides that, we had a really number of companies. You know, ExxonMobil was moving. J.P. Stevens moved.
J.C. Penney.
J.C. Penney
Yep.
moved. And there were the situation, you know, Penny moved to Plano, everyone was saying over here, and we were worried about keeping companies over here. And the person responsible for economic development has a big role. So one of the major things was, how do we keep people in the 5 boroughs?
Right.
And also at that time, Brooklyn, my favorite borough since I was born there, and I went to college in downtown Brooklyn. Downtown Brooklyn was, it had its ups and downs over the years. I mean, and one of the large landowners of downtown Brooklyn was New York Polytech. So what happened over there with Metrotech, the creation of Metrotech?
Well, if I could just talk a little bit first about the strategy. We recognized that we were losing cost-sensitive operations, like the back office operations of a financial service and other firms.
Right, they were all moving to Jersey City
They were
at that
all
time.
moving. So we could see what our competition was offering. We could do the numbers, and we did. And we said, well, ideally, we would love to reduce taxes across the board so that we could just compete with them straight across for everyone. Well, to do across-the-board tax cuts of the magnitude necessary to compete was just not feasible. So we said, well, if companies are in Manhattan below 96th Street and they're willing to move to New Jersey, why don't we develop an incentive package that will compete to New Jersey, not if they stay in Manhattan, but if they move to northern Manhattan or any of the 4 other boroughs. If they do and they apply on a timely basis, we will grant them these benefits. We call them as of right, meaning they're non-discretionary. To reduce their energy costs, to eliminate the commercial occupancy tax, to reduce corporate taxes, and to reduce their real estate taxes. It was a very powerful
This
package.
was, did we call this the REAP benefits at that time?
Part of that was called REAP, yes. and it worked.
I mean, REAP continues to work in
Yes,
many
it does.
aspects. It's not as publicized as it used to be in over there. But one of the major, really major accomplishments was, as you were saying, the banks were moving, the financial services were moving, and Chase at that time, wasn't J.P. Morgan at that time, Chase Manhattan Bank was really thinking of moving, and
They were.
and they really wanted incentives. So what happened? Brooklyn.
Well,
Metro
in
Tech.
Brooklyn, yes, we put this package of benefits on the table. We had many, many meetings. It's my first serious negotiations with the then CFO, Mike Esposito, and I at every meeting tried to take one thing off the table, meet his needs in one area and get it done. And they were going to take their board on a bus tour of the location that they had down as a finalist in New Jersey and in Brooklyn. And I asked to be on the bus tour for the Brooklyn portion. And they, of course, said no. So I went in to see the mayor, and I said, I have a problem. He said, what do you need? I said, well, the Chase board, the Chase executives are taking their board on a bus tour in Brooklyn. What do you need? I want it to look safe, and I want it to be clean. Well, the sanitation department made those streets so clean, you could have eaten off the streets. And apparently there was a wall of blue. There were police buses, police cars, police cycles, policemen standing in knots. It was kind of like the St. Patrick's Day parade.
It was like the theater was set.
Yes.
The theater was set, and they went down. But it was a double combination because Chase did subsequently move down to Metro Tech, but there was also the development of Metro Tech that was an important city incentive.
It was because Brooklyn Union, now called Keyspan, now called National Grid, had said that when we got the first significant tenant, it would build its headquarters building there, and they did that.
Now, in addition, there was another major program in
Brooklyn Army Terminal. That's right. We had gotten that facility from the federal government for, I don't know, $1 or something like that, and the mayor had tried.
Great location, on the water.
Wonderful. Very secure, lots of truck bays and loading docks, and the security was really important. Ed had tried to find developers interested in doing something with it. He could not. So I talked to some manufacturers, and we said, well, why don't we put some city capital dollars in and redevelop the first 1 million square feet ourselves? And the mayor agreed, and we did that, and it was tremendously successful. The first rents were something like $4 a square foot, and over the years, successive hundreds of thousands of square feet have also been redeveloped by the city there, and it's a very successful project.
It's 1989. The person who has spent the past 23, 24, 25 years, quarter of a century, working, in the public eye, in the government, in Washington and in New York, decides it's time to take a different route. What do you do?
Well, I knew the mayor was going to run for a fourth term. I thought he may have energy to spare, and he did. But I was getting a little weary. But it's kind of hard to look for a job right there under the nose of the mayor. So fortunately, Crain's New York business came to me.
They had just been really here only a couple years at that time in New York.
They'd been here since, I think, 1985. So they were still establishing the brand, as we said. And I said, oh, yes, I would love to be publisher. If I'm going to go, I need to go pretty soon. I don't want anybody, including the mayor, to think I'm leaving in the midst of a campaign. That would not serve him well. So I started, I think, in February 1989.
And you stayed there until?
Until full-time until the end of 2006, all the while writing a column. And when I decided I wanted more time for me and left, I still write a column.
Now, but during those years at Crain's, I mean, during all the years, but you've been involved with so many programs, both philanthropic and community-oriented, especially the one in Buffalo, which you take a lot of credit for.
Well, Governor Pataki in 2004, I think it was, no, 3, asked me if I would be vice chairman of the Buffalo Financial Control Board. The city had gotten into fiscal difficulties.
And you had good experience from New York City.
Well, yes. I mean,
Right.
I knew municipal budgeting. I knew the state politics and state budgeting. So I love the state of New York. I'm, as you say, from upstate. So I was pleased to accept, and I've been going up to Buffalo on a regular basis for the last 8 years.
And Lincoln Center you've been involved with for many years.
Many years, yes.
And now you're involved in what aspects of Lincoln Center?
Well, I'm on the board of Lincoln Center, Inc. I am the newish chairman of something called City Center of Music and Drama. What that really means is the David H. Koch Theater on the Lincoln Center campus. That theater used to be called the New York State Theater. It is the home of New York City Opera and New York City Ballet. And so my entity runs the theater on behalf of those two companies and provides them certain shared services.
And the Boy Scouts?
The Boy Scouts, yes. About a month ago, I was elected president of the Boy Scouts of the 5 boroughs. It's the lead volunteer position. I've worked with the Scouts for a number of years and am quite passionate about what they do for boys and girls in New York.
Citizens Budget Committee.
Yes.
On the board of TIA CREF for many years. And it goes on and on.
It does.
I think you have more honorary degrees than most people that I know over the years. But so, you know, the interesting thing is for the girl who was born in Rochester, New York, who grew up in Elmira, who really didn't spend too much time in the Big Apple, you've truly been a builder of New York, and I'd like to thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Cushman & Wakefield, Dimes Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Eastern Consolidated, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Newmark Knight Frank, RAL Development Services, The Spandrel Group, LLC, Siami Development, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Urban American, the Wyckoff Group.